There's an invisible beam of light watching millions of commercial drivers every single day. We're going to dig into the potential health risks of these infrared cameras that are used in driver monitoring systems. But more than that, we're going to ask a really critical question. What would actually change if the much stricter European safety rules were applied right here?
So where does a story like this even begin? Well, it starts with the people who are actually behind the wheel. Let's take a look at the data that really kicked off this entire investigation in the first place. The direct experiences of the drivers themselves. So, a survey of 121 drivers, it revealed a pattern that's frankly pretty startling. Get this, over 82% reported eye irritation. We're talking itchy, dry, watery eyes. And almost 75% said their eyes just felt more tired ever since the cameras were installed. Now, these aren't just one-off complaints. This is a huge cluster of symptoms that really demands a closer look.
Okay, so to really understand what could be causing these symptoms, we've got to look at the technology itself. We are talking about a type of light that is constantly pointed at a driver's face, but it's completely invisible to the naked eye.
These driver monitoring systems use what's called near-infrared, or NIR, light. It basically lights up the driver's face so an AI can track their head and eye movements 24/7, day or night, looking for fatigue or distraction. The really key thing to understand here is that even though you can't see it, your body, and especially your eyes, can absolutely still be affected by it.
And this right here really gets to the heart of the problem. Just think about what you do when a bright light shines in your face, right? You blink, you squint, you turn your head away. That's your body's natural defense mechanism. But with invisible infrared light, that whole aversion response just doesn't happen. Your eye has literally no idea that it needs to protect itself.
And the potential fallout from that kind of constant, undefended exposure is pretty serious. I mean, scientific studies have linked long-term infrared exposure to a whole bunch of health concerns. For the eyes, you're looking at risks of retinal burns and even an increased chance of developing cataracts over time. And for your skin, especially that thin skin around the eyes, the risks include thermal burns and premature aging. Okay, so if these risks are scientifically documented, what are the current safety standards that are supposed to be protecting workers? And, maybe more importantly, do those standards actually line up with what drivers are telling us they're experiencing on the job? The industry standard that companies always point to is called IEC 62471. Basically, it's a system for classifying the biological hazard of any light source, from a light bulb to the LEDs in these cameras. And based on this standard, these devices almost always get classified as low risk. And here it is in black and white. This is the official line from UPS, responding to a formal complaint. They point right to that low-risk classification, stating the devices are, quote, not hazardous. But, and this is a really big but, notice that little qualifier they use, under normal behavioral limitations. We'll definitely be coming back to what normal means in a minute. But this brings up a huge question that drivers have been asking over and over. If the risk is really so minimal, then why is there a complete and total lack of information? No training on the potential hazards, no guidance for people who might be photosensitive, and zero information about very common medications that can make you more sensitive to light. So, is that it? Is that the end of the story? A low-risk label on one side and a growing list of driver complaints on the other? Well, not quite. To get a totally different perspective, let's look at how this exact situation is handled somewhere else. There's a much more comprehensive framework for protecting workers that's already in place in the European Union. See, in the EU, they have a specific law, Directive 2006/25/EC, that deals with this exact thing. It doesn't just slap a label on a device and call it a day. No, it actually forces employers to take a proactive, ongoing role in protecting their workers from any artificial light source, and that includes the infrared from these cameras. And the difference in philosophy here is just stark. The EU's approach isn't a one-time thing. It's a continuous cycle with 4 crystal-clear obligations for the employer. You have to assess the exposure, reduce the risks, inform and train your workers, and provide health monitoring. It's a complete shift from just product compliance to ongoing worker protection. So, let's just imagine this for a second. What if we took these exact EU rules and applied them to the driver-facing cameras we're talking about? How would things be different for a driver who's out there on the road 60 to 70 hours a week?
Well, first off, that complete lack of information we talked about, it would be illegal. Plain and simple. Under the EU directive, employers would be legally required to provide comprehensive training. They'd have to explain the potential risks of IR exposure, how to spot adverse health effects, and exactly how to report them. The silence would be replaced by mandatory education.
Next up, that huge issue of long-term chronic exposure would have to be dealt with head-on. A driver working 60 or 70 hours a week for decades, that is not a normal behavioral limitation. The EU directive would force a company to assess that specific high-duration exposure and take real active steps to reduce the risk to a minimum. That could even mean limiting the intensity or the duration of the infrared light itself.
This is a huge one. Photosensitive individuals could no longer be ignored. The EU directive forces employers to specifically consider particularly sensitive risk groups. So what does that mean? It means people with pre-existing conditions or folks who are taking medications that increase light sensitivity, they would require their own specific adapted protections. That one-size-fits-all approach just wouldn't be legal anymore.
And let's circle all the way back to that survey. If a driver reported eye pain, irritation, and headaches, the EU directive kicks a clear protocol into motion. The employer would be obligated to provide a medical exam, and if a link is found to the infrared exposure, they'd have to review their entire risk assessment and actually implement new safety measures. It creates this powerful feedback loop that forces the system to get safer in response to worker health.
So, this all leads us to one final, really important question. A device can be compliant with a product standard, sure, but does that automatically make its application safe for every single worker in every single situation? The huge contrast between the current approach and the EU's Worker First Directive suggests that for the people behind the wheel, the answer might be a lot more complicated than a simple low-risk sticker.